right, thank you. Hi, I'm Alana Unfried.
I'm Judith Canner, and we are both at Cal State, Monterey Bay. And we're really excited to have you all here today. So we are going to be talking about how to address social inequalities in group work. And to get things started, we wanted to engage you in an activity. So we have a question for you. How smart are you? So think about that question for a minute, and then start thinking about what criteria would you use if you wanted to rank yourself against the appears to be about 200 people in this current webinar. How would you rank yourself? What criteria would you develop to make that comparison about your intelligence? How smart are you? So we're going to give you about 30 seconds to start thinking about this. So take a few seconds and then we'll come back. All right, so now what we're going to do is we are going to share in the Google chat a Google Doc that you should be able to access, and everybody should be able to access. We'll see how it goes having this many people on a Google Doc at once. But when you look underneath the first question, you'll see that question we asked, how smart are you, what criteria? And we would like you to start writing in some of the criteria you developed. So you can just pick one line, start writing out a few of those criteria. You don't need to give all of them, just a few. So I'm starting to see a lot of different ones appear. We have years of experience. We have ability to converse intelligently about a wide range of topics. Age, your profession, test scores, GPA, just your street smarts. I like that one. The idea of emotional intelligence, your performance on a task. These are all things that you're currently writing in there. IQ is popping up. So all of these things are ways that we might consider measuring our intelligence, right? And we made this question very broad. But really what we're looking at here is what we would call status characteristics. So you as a group already put several of these things, but you might also include things like your reading ability or your social class. Even if it's unconscious, many of us engage in this attribution of intelligence based on status characteristics. And we also do this in our classroom. And if we don't think about how we do this, think about how your students might be doing this as well. And if we don't manage status, then that is going to lead to unequal participation in the classroom. This became a really big deal for us this past 2 years. As was mentioned in the previous session, in 2018, the entire California State University system, which we are a part of, moved away from mathematics remediation. We moved at CSUMB to a commingled co-requisite model, a co-rec being just a 1 unit add-on to our intro stat class. By commingled, what we mean is that now in our intro stat class, we have students who have been deemed both by multiple measures and other assessments, both ready for college level mathematics, but also those who have been deemed underprepared for college level mathematics. And so when you're mingling together two different preparation levels for a class, you're going to start to have to deal with status issues across your courses, not just in our intro courses for stats, but also calculus and other classes. So we needed to figure out a way to deal with this, and that led us to the idea of complex instruction. Complex instruction is a pedagogical practice, and the way you can think about it is we want, and this was to engage our students, right? We want to get our students engaged in the material and to be successful learners. Often what happens though is students typically only engage with content through the teacher. Right, so the teacher is then managing the content and they're managing the students. But they are not, and then they're managing how the students engage with that content. So, the student manages or engages with the content just through the teacher. What complex instruction is focusing on is the idea that the teacher really should be managing how the student engages with the content, not being this sort of conduit or access point for the student, but actually thinking about how they engage in this. And this brings us to complex instruction. Complex instruction builds on these pedagogies broadly supported by active learning already, but it's a little bit different in the sense that in addition to thinking about active learning, we are also thinking about social inequality in the classroom and those ideas of status and engagement. There's an issue that can happen where we see students thinking, I'm not a math person. And because of that, they can lead to lower achievement or academic success in the classroom. This is a method that's been widely developed in secondary mathematics, and we decided to adapt to our classrooms. And we really wanted to disrupt that hierarchy of who is smart and who is not. So at the center of it all, complex instruction is built on 3 core ideas. We have first, multiple ability curriculum. Then we have norms, roles, and participation structures. And then status and accountability. And complex instruction lies at the center of all of those. We're going to go into more detail about each of these throughout the presentation. So that brings us to our next question. How do you currently engage in group work in your intro stat courses? So again, what we're going to do in that Google Doc under question 2, I'm going to set a timer for 1 minute. Go ahead and write out some of the ways you engage your students in classroom work, in group work.
All right, we're starting to see a lot of great ideas come in. I'm seeing a lot about group presentations and projects, take-home exams. Think, Pair, Share is one that we use as well. Group discussions on something. There's a lot about discussions or classroom problems, hands-on activities where students are working together, clickers. So a lot of those probably sound familiar. So thank you for adding all of these ideas. We're going to give you a little bit of how complex instruction now would deal with the structure of group work and getting into more of these details. So, oops, too far. So I'm going to focus first here on norms, roles, and participation structures. You'll notice the kind of definition here says developing the autonomy of interdependence of small groups through the use of norms, roles, and other structures of participation. So you can see we're focused on small groups, making them autonomous where they can work together without intervention through the use of these particular structures. So what does this look like? The first thing that we do in class is we develop norms. So norms define how we learn together, and this is something that we do on the very first day of class. So all of the first class period in our introductory statistics is devoted to a classroom discussion that leads students to the development of their own norms for what they think class should look like in order to make it a productive learning environment. And then we, as the instructors, still provide the final say. So students help to generate, but then we add on with some details. You'll notice some of these might look familiar, right? You can ask your group member for help, but we also emphasize that you have the duty to assist group members for help. And some of these go a little bit beyond what you would see in a typical group structure. So for instance, only ask the instructor when it's a team question. Anytime a group asks us a question, the first thing we'll ask them is, what did your team say? And if they say, well, we haven't really talked about it yet, we say, raise your hand again after you've talked as a group, and then I can help out a little bit if you're still stuck. You'll also notice one that says work within your group, no cross-talk with other groups. So this is built on the idea of that group autonomy, that we're trying to train a group to see that they alone can solve a problem. We want them to view their group members as sufficient and to believe in one another instead of feeling like they need to reach out to someone from another group who they think might be smarter or more well-equipped to answer that question. But the overall sense we want them to have is that no one is as smart as the whole group together. That when we all tackle something together, we'll be able to solve the problem. So what is a participation structure? For us, this is what do the actual groups look like in the classroom. So we work off of randomized groups that we re-randomize about every 3 weeks. The groups are about 3 to 4 students, and we randomize to promote that idea that each student is equally capable. This is really different from the view of assigning groups based on what you think student competencies are. So if I assign students based on you need some extra help, and you're really good at this, so I'm going to pair you together. the student who needs the extra help is going to know that that they're that student, right? And so we want to build in this structure where they're seeing us assigning them randomly because we believe that they can all do this. This was really terrifying to me when we first started complex instruction, but it's become one of my favorite features, and we've started using this across our statistics curriculum for upper division courses as well. It's really enhanced our classes. Also, we have roles. So this works or helps students with how the work should be done. It's not saying something like you should do the math and you write up the answer. It's more about just managing how the group is functioning together. We'll talk a little bit more about roles later. So we have another discussion question here about that background knowledge for students, because this can really affect that group dynamic, right? So how does the preparation or background knowledge vary from student to student in your own introductory statistics classroom? So I'll give you a little bit of time there to answer question 3. And again, I'll repost that link just in case anybody came in late and wasn't able to see it. So again, how does the background knowledge or preparation vary from student to student in your own classroom? And as you're writing, I'll note I did see a question about how this looks with online classes. We will talk about that for sure at the end of our presentation, how we've adapted. Yeah, so I'm seeing responses about some students, barely being able to do basic math or having a hard time with technology. There's a lot of this some, right? So some of our students are really, really great, right? And can do everything we ask of them. Some of them really struggle with these things. That there's a huge, wildly varying group of students in our classes. Yeah, and this is the same with us too. I think it just became magnified when we moved to this co-requisite structure, but it was there all along. Maybe we just weren't paying enough attention to it. Yeah, we have the same situation. Some have taken AP statistics and some have never seen math or statistics and are very terrified of the course, right? So we need to somehow deal with those different students within the group and the different abilities that they come into the group with. And so we address that with what's called the multiple ability curriculum. So this is the idea of providing curricular activities that are open-ended, rich in multiple abilities, and that support learning important math concepts and skills central to a big idea. So the multiple abilities aspect is saying there's not just one entry point into this problem, and there's not just one solution, but there's multiple ways for all of these diverse students to be able to tackle this problem. So the way that we do this is with what are called group-worthy tasks. You might have heard of this before, but these are open-ended, uncertain tasks that don't have one final solution. A very basic example would be that group project that a lot of you referenced, right? We do this in IntroStat as well. They have a semester-long project with their groups. I don't know what the final answer is ahead of time, and they get to explore it. Multiple abilities are required to complete that task. But we also do this on a much smaller scale within a particular class period. So an example would be when we're working on experiments, students follow an experimental protocol to compare paper airplane flights with and without a paperclip. Many of you might have heard of that activity before, but we do the whole thing in one class period in these group structures. And so multiple abilities are required to complete this. It's not just about how quickly can you calculate something or how comfortable with you are you with a computer. You need to have somebody with attention to detail for following that protocol, someone who can measure well, someone who's good with time management to make sure that your group stays on task and gets their work done by the deadline. There's multiple abilities that are needed to make this a successful class period. So the next question we want to ask you is, what challenges do you encounter when you're implementing group work? So what challenges or struggles do you have? That is question number 4. Oh, the Google link is down to heavy traffic we're seeing. So if you're having trouble getting in there, we do have people still responding, and Judith and I will make sure to mention some of the responses out loud as we go. So challenges for implementing group work. Yep.
I'm also seeing, I know some people are experiencing that, and a few people are throwing it into the chat box, which is fine if you can't access. So we are seeing students staying on task for any length of time, that varied participation, interest, and motivation. Some ideas around mathematical maturity and how they approach things. They can't seem to stay on task is popping up a lot. Some students tune out immediately and expect others to do the work. These are all things that we have noticed and we have seen too. Motivations for engaging are not equally present, disengagement. And so one of the things we learned as we were, especially as we started engaging with this pedagogy, and we did go through some professional development around it, is that the idea that students are unmotivated sometimes might be maybe misplaced. And so that brings us to the third prong, if you will, of complex instruction, status and accountability. The idea that we need to manage status and hold individuals and small groups accountable for participation and understanding. And this brings us back to our original question, how smart are you? Right, we asked you this question because, again, students are engaging with this question every day in our classroom. And often what we might think is maybe lack of motivation or lack of interest might actually be due to these status characteristics. A student has maybe just identified themselves as not being able to engage. And so you see them take that posture of sitting backwards and disengaging from the group. Or maybe the other students in the group have identified and attributed a status of that student not being able to participate or engage or provide any support or abilities to complete the task. And they'll actually actively eliminate the student from the group, either just by not responding to anything they say, or sometimes you can even see this, maybe not so much in a college classroom, but in classrooms with younger students, they will physically exclude the student in some way from the group. And so we really want to challenge that idea that it's just lack of motivation. And it might be more to status characteristics that lead to unequal participation. So how we manage this is, again, through some of the ways we've already talked about. We randomize our groups, right? We make sure, and we tell students, all students are equally capable. With those multiple abilities, we point those out at the very beginning of the class in that task. And so we tell them that there are going to be things that you are good at and things that you are still learning how to do. We love that three-letter word, yet, right? You might not know how to do this yet, but we will help you get there. And then the major thing that we need to think about is assigning competence to our students. The idea behind assigning competence is that you need to figure out how your students are smart and you need to tell them out loud. So if a student is just really good at organization, you mention that out loud in front of the classroom or in front of their group, letting that group know that they're really good at organization and that that group should really listen to them because they might help them set up their data collection methods in a much better way than they were thinking about. Or maybe you have a student who's really good at coding, right? You can point that out. But at the same time, you're also going to give students in your classroom the ability to engage in things that maybe they don't think they are good at, right? That yet, they are not good at it yet, but they will be. And so you think about roles and how to get the students to switch off roles, saying, all right, you're going to be the one who's going to be coding in Jump or R right now. But the catch is the other person is going to be telling you what to do. So you're not allowed, and then you switch it up. So you're not allowing one person to take over the task. And so through all of these things, we can manage status and accountability, but it does take some effort to really think about and get to know your students so that you can tell them and assign competence to them.
So one of the big questions we get is, how do students actually respond to this very structured group work environment? So we'll start with saying there's always pushback. You will commonly hear students in evaluations saying they wanted their professors to lecture more. I'm sure many of you have heard that for your own classes before as well. They think sometimes they're teaching themselves too much. It can also be frustrating for students that they have to talk to their group mates before they can reach out to their instructor. They can feel that their instructor is inaccessible to them. So we really have to emphasize that we are there for the group, even if it looks a little different than it might, than maybe what they're expecting. And we've also had trouble with roles. They sometimes can feel that these roles are juvenile, and that has to do with the roles being used well, which we'll talk about in a minute. But what is some qualitative feedback? So overall, what you're going to find from students is that they think that switching it up ends up being a positive thing. They lose that embarrassment that comes with asking questions because they know almost everyone in class due to the group randomizations. They have a sense of belonging from that as well. Students were saying, I have contact numbers from half the people in my class who normally they wouldn't know because they've been rotating and meeting students. And because of that, they're more willing to reach out and ask for help and build study groups. The last comment here, students say, I can go to anyone and I know we'll figure it out. So they're getting this sense of agency and the belief that even if they're struggling, they know they can figure it out with their peers because they've been doing that in class so regularly. But what about some actual data? We've also done surveys of our students and their experiences in our introductory statistics course. So you'll see overwhelmingly in the agree and strongly agree that students benefit from working with their peers. This is their own feedback. They find that they are able to contribute to the group discussions. And again, this is about the students themselves contributing, finding that they have the ability to add something. They find that the classroom environment is supportive, even in this structured environment. And some actual data based on our co-requisite structure. We were really, again, concerned of this issue with this issue of equity, right? Of students being underprepared in the classroom and having these wildly varied backgrounds. So prior to this redesign, we had a math remediation model. And when we looked at students who had gone through math remediation, we wanted to compare them to students who never needed that remediation. So in our original intro stat class, if you didn't require remediation, you came into college just ready for college level statistics, 77% of those students passed intro stat. And again, that's still not great, right? But then we compare that to students who went through remediation. After remediation, you're considered remediated, right? That you should be at the same level as your peers. And yet we found that only 57% of those students could successfully pass introductory statistics. This was a huge equity gap that we found that we were really disappointed with, but we hadn't really been crunching these numbers, kind of paying attention to this issue until we had to. So after moving to the co-requisite model, again, where everybody goes straight into introductory statistics, no matter what their background is, we're now comparing, again, those college-ready students. Those students now have an 80.5% pass rate. And then our students who took the co-rec, so that's who you would consider traditionally underprepared, they passed at an 87% pass rate. Now those students are self-selected, but overall those are our students who are feeling like they need more support, that they're underprepared for college level statistics. So we essentially flipped our equity gap here. Oh, you're muted, Judith.
Yep, sorry. So I know this is on, it had to happen once, on everybody's mind right now. How do we deal with this transition to what I'm calling remote teaching, because I know there are many people out there who are qualified online instructors, and that is not me. So what we did this semester is we moved to a combination of asynchronous and synchronous time. So asynchronous were mini video lectures that the students engaged in before they came to class. So they would watch them, and then there was also readings and other things they would do. Then during the synchronous time, we would meet live in Zoom. That was going to be our activity time. So we used randomized Zoom breakout rooms for the group work. And so usually the students had a Google Doc or some activity that they were working on so we could monitor their progress and how they were doing. And then the students have a feature where they can actually call the instructor to their room if they have a question. We also can bounce around from room to room and just sort of check in, see how things are going. Now, there are challenges with this. First of all, managing status is very hard to do when you're in an online environment. It's harder to call out things. And I think it's going to be even more challenging in the fall, where we don't get to start our semester with our students. We're starting virtually. In addition, the group roles, because we're using the randomized Zoom breakout rooms, they only really get to stay in those groups for more than one day. And it's a lot harder to hold students accountable for participation because we can't see what's going on. The Google Docs help, but we just can't see what's going on like we could in the classroom. So I know we're going to be thinking a lot more about this over the summer and in the fall as we continue with virtual instruction in the CSU system. And then some practical tips for you all if you're interested in getting into this idea of complex instruction. The one thing we do want to let you know is that full buy-in is challenging. We had professional development and it's taken us time. We've been working on this for several years and we're still not, I don't think, experts in it. But it has been a very beneficial process, and we are implementing it across our instruction, our courses. In addition, those roles can be really hard, and it is hard to get tasks that truly are complex enough where the roles really matter. And so that's something else that we are working on and considering. We also use reading apprenticeship, which we can talk about if you ever want to later, but the idea is they will read before they come to class, and that helps lessen some of the time we would take in face-to-face sort of lecture instruction.
To summarize, because we want to have time for questions, here are some next steps for you of things you can try. Check those equity gaps. Try managing status. You can do that in your classroom now. Try just randomizing your groups and make that the one new thing you try. Try just developing one new group-worthy tasks, or try a new participation structure. There's also 2 books here that have been kind of the key guides for us for complex instruction. We also just want to thank our colleagues real quickly. It wasn't just the 2 of us. Our entire math and statistics department contributed to this. And we're thankful to Lisa Jilk, who introduced this idea to us. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We have lots of questions in the Q&A. A few are similar and might be quick to answer is, how large are the classes in which you are doing this? And do you see ways to stretch it to larger or smaller classes?
Our introductory statistics course is capped at 36 students, and we did have to negotiate that with our dean to get it to be smaller to use this structure. If you went larger, it's very hard to manage the groups in class by yourself. I think it could be done if you have an in-class TA or student assistant with you to help answer group questions while they're working.
All right, and say something about the materials that are you using in the course?
Yeah, for our introductory stats course, we use the open intro book. We love it. We use the randomization version. Our university is really big on open educational resources for our students to keep the cost down. So that's the main book that we follow. We have developed our own activities and note packets that the students fill out and work with during class.
We have some other things that maybe I'll pass on to you afterwards and you can reply personally. What about the jigsaw approach to assigning groups?
Yeah, the jigsaw is great. We haven't gotten into other group structures, but that also can very well be used for complex instruction. If you're not familiar with the jigsaw, the idea is you assign numbers or letters to break students out into groups, and they all have to solve something or learn something together, and then they re-jigsaw to a different group basically, and all have to share something out. That's a great way to give each student agency in the group to need something to present or that they're accountable for in their group. That's definitely a great technique for complex instruction.
It's also mentioned, I believe, in the back of the Designing Group Workbook. If Alana, you want to go back that slide.
Oh, yeah.
And they go into some detail about that method.
All right. We got 1 minute left. Are there any issues in these random assignments at finding somebody, a minority or a woman alone in a group, and does that cause other issues?
I mean, that's always going to happen at some point because it's randomized, but this is why I actually prefer randomizing, because if I don't randomize and students choose their own groups, then inevitably that student gets isolated, or students will get isolated. So this actually avoids a lot of those issues of students needing to find a group. That's also the reason that we re-randomize after about 2 or 3 weeks, because if there is a weird group dynamic, it's always going to change. So they know they can get through it for 2 weeks if it's not ideal, and then they get to kind of start fresh the next time.
All right, well, thank you very much. I'm sure there's more to discuss on this in another venue.